Okay, it's 6 o'clock. I'd like to go ahead and call this meeting to order. This is a workshop meeting of the Manitou Springs City Council for April the 8th, 2025. We'll start with a roll call. I'll note first that Councilor Weatherholt is excused. She has excused absence. Councilor Fortune,
Present.
Councilor Chandler,
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Johnson.
Here.
Councilor Shada.
Here.
Councilor Wolf,
Here.
and the mayor is also present. Okay, thank you. We don't customarily ask for approval of agenda for a work session, but since it's on the agenda, I would ask for a motion to approve.
I move. I'll second.
Okay, motion a second. Okay. Just do a voice vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the agenda is approved. Okay, so we have 3 discussion items tonight. The first is from Schneider Electric. It'll be a discussion of measurement and verification procedures. So, ladies, if you'd like to come forward. Yeah, okay, yeah. Denise, please. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, you have given us approval to move forward with the Schneider Electric contract. One of the things that we talked about this last week was measurement and verification approaches. And so I asked them to bring this to council so that you can look at it, review it, and make sure you support the recommendation that they have. So that what they'll be bringing tonight as we move forward with this project and try to get it under contract fairly soon. Thanks.
Great, thank you. And ladies, if you'd give us your name and titles, and then you can go ahead and get started.
I'm Kate Zipla, Account Manager with Schneider Electric.
I'm Paige Spurk, Regional Manager with Schneider Electric.
And we have 2 online.
Tyler DeLala with Schneider Electric.
Kelsey Gorman, Measurement and Verification Expert at Schneider Electric.
Okay. And we can hear you, Kelsey and Tyler. Thank you very much. We'll be punting to them at some point, but I can kick things off. So very much appreciate your time this evening, Council. And we wanted to present this information to all of you. We know that there were a lot of questions during our last council session about how we measure, how we verify, how we guarantee. So we thought this workshop style presentation would be helpful for you. Please feel free to ask questions. We'll present the recommended measurement and verification protocols that we have for this particular project and all of the scope that lives in it. And again, please stop me if you have any questions. Let me see if my clicker works. I need to point it at the screen. Okay, thank you. So we'll introduce, oh, it was turned off. Okay, let's see if that works next. So we'll introduce M&V. We'll use that acronym quite a bit. So I wanted to make sure everyone understood what that means, measurement and verification. There are several different options or protocols depending on the exact scope of work that typically fits into these projects. So we'll do an overview of each and what we recommend. And then we'll go through the full measurement and verification strategy for this project, everything from the water meters to the lights, windows, and HVAC. There we go. Yes. Okay. So we do take a very prescriptive approach to our measurement and verification. There are some things that we can do pre-implementations or pre-construction on the water meter side in particular. We've already done that by doing our water meter testing, by pulling out a sample, sending it to a lab for testing and establishing that baseline. We've also done that by getting light fixture counts and doing a full audit of all of the facilities. And then during implementation, we will conduct both pre and post measurements for whatever piece of equipment we are installing, just to make sure that we understand how it was operating previously, make sure it's operating correctly after it's installed, and get some pictures and also documentation that it was installed correctly and it is working as designed. And then the post-implementation, that's the longer term M&V. As we know, there are 3 years of statutory requirements through the state. So the first year, we typically make 2 visits. to measure and verify what's happening. And then at the end of year 2 and year 3, you'll see us for 1 visit. And that's when, if the shortfall is found, then we would be responsible to help you make up the difference and also correct whatever issue caused that shortfall in the first place. So there are lots of different reasons why we would measure and verify a project like this. Obviously, it is statutorily required, but that's not the only reason we do it. We want to make sure that we're sharing an appropriate amount of risk with you so that that creates a strong partnership and it makes sure that we're working in your best interest. We want to make sure your savings guarantees are met as designed. And over time, it could also help us identify potentially additional savings in your facilities or in those systems to create further efficiencies, more savings, and also just help Roy and his team from a maintenance and operations perspective keep an eye on what's happening with those systems. And we want to reduce those uncertainties to reasonable levels. I know there's a lot of uncertainty with, who knows what's going to happen in 20 years, especially with recent events that have happened over the last week. It's hard to know even what's going to happen a couple months from now, but we do have some ways that we can reduce uncertainties with our measurement and verification so that you can have the confidence this project is going to pay for itself. So when we're building a measurement and verification plan, we want to make sure there's, of course, an element of accuracy, but we want to balance it with the cost. There is a cost for us to do the measurement and verification, and there are other protocols that can be somewhat costly or just simply don't make sense for the scope. So we want to make sure we pick the appropriate one, and we'll go over what all those options are. We want to make sure every effect on the project is considered within reason. We talked a lot about things like behavioral things, such as if a water customer decides to take shorter showers or not water their lawn as much. Obviously, that's a behavioral thing that we can't control, but we'll at least try to map that out and see how it could potentially affect your project. But we want to make sure only measurable parameters are in our measurement and verification plan. And we also want to make sure this is really conservative. We certainly don't want you to have a shortfall. We want you to be, generating as much or more revenue than we project. We want to make sure your utility savings are where they should be. So we tend to take a very conservative approach when we do our investment grade audit. And this also creates some transparency for you as well. We'll be providing these reports to you. The Energy Office will be reviewing them and approving them, and we'll be able to walk you through them anytime these reports are due. So I won't go over all the statutory requirements. I believe I've covered these in previous meetings. If you have any questions, you are more than welcome to reach out to Charlie or Oren from the Energy Office. But we want to make sure that obviously the statutory requirements are covered. So this language and all of the requirements are listed in your contract language. So we'll work with Denise and Jeff to make sure this meets statute. But we're going to be putting your M&V plan into the contract so we know exactly what's going to happen, at least for that statutory period of the first 3 years. So looking at the timeline specifically for Manitou Springs, when would the measurement and verification theoretically kick in? So we're expecting that construction would be done by the end of this calendar year. So sometime starting early 2026, the construction would be complete. That's when we consider that the year 1 start. So as soon as everything is installed, we're going to be doing our baseline measurements and making sure everything was installed properly. We'll let that go for that first year and give you a couple visits and provide that report. In 2027, that's when the year 1 reconciliation would happen if there were to be a shortfall. and then year 2 would begin, and then so on and so forth. So we have until 2029 before the city would even need to make a decision about continuing measurement and verification services if you wish to do that longer term. So you have some time to consider that. It would be a separate contract directly with Schneider Electric after those first 3 years are complete. So we can certainly keep you posted. You'll be seeing those reports for the first few years. You can get a feel for what they look like and what value they bring to you. And you can decide after that year 3 if you'd like to continue long-term. So I'm going to hand it over to Kelsey, and I promise there is a math equation here. We won't make anyone do math. We just want to explain how we get our calculations. So she'll take over from here.
Okay, so part of your project will include energy savings, and that would be mainly the lighting portion of this project. And the way that we want to look at energy savings is to take a baseline, what you used before you got the upgrades, and then look at what you're using after the upgrades. It's simple enough, but there is a lot that goes into it, which is also denoted by these adjustments at the end. Our main goal in measurement verification will be to isolate the work that we did and measure only that work. We don't want to measure anything that we didn't influence, whether it's positive or negative to you. So that's why this baseline energy use takes into account things like weather, occupancy, billing days, because all of those things can have a small or large effect on your utility bill. And then in the performance period, we're going to be doing the same thing. We don't want anything else to influence the savings that we're seeing except for the scope of work that we did. If you decide to quit using lights in half of your building for whatever reason, just a hypothetical, then we don't want to inflate the savings that we're taking because of that, and vice versa. So that's where the non-routine adjustments can also come into place. If you make changes to your facility that will impact the scope, then we can take that information and calculate the impact of that energy change. We can go, there we go. Another part of this project is a little bit different in how we measure, and that's the water revenue generation. So since the water usage itself is not being impacted, we're not going to use the same type of equation as the last slide. We're only impacting the accuracy that the meters are reading. So we're not measuring, as Kate mentioned, individual use of water like longer showers, shorter showers, gardening, etc. So the way that we calculate the revenue increase is that we are going to take the baseline gallons of water that is consumed by the city and hold that steady to calculate the savings, because we don't want anything influencing our calculations except for what we did, which is increase the accuracy. So we're going to apply that baseline use of water and say, hey, if you would have had the more accurate meters that we've installed for you, what could you have been generating revenue-wise? And then you would subtract from that the actual revenue that was generated with the old meters. And the difference would be your revenue generation. So the International Performance Measurement and Verification Protocol, which is a mouthful, and you can abbreviate it IPMVP, is the gold standard when it comes to measurement and verification. I would venture to say that all ESCOs use it because it is it's just the standard that we use to measure and verify everything. I would say too that the Colorado Energy Office is going to require anyone to use that, any company who's doing M&V or an energy project with you. And the IPMVP lays out 4 different ways. They're called options, but you can think of them more as protocols to measure the savings. They're just called A, B, C, and D, and they're going to consider different scopes of work and different ways to measure them depending on what is being changed about the energy use or the accuracy of meters. And it's our role, mine specifically, to determine what would be a good fit for this scope of work. Obviously, you have some control, it's your project, but I'm not going to recommend something to you that does not financially or, I guess, mathematically make sense. It's got to be possible, reasonable, affordable, and accurate. We'll spend a little bit more time on option A than the other options because that is the option that we're recommending to measure your scopes of work for both lighting and water meters. And I will explain, I've got a whole slide in just a minute to explain how I came upon that decision.
Yes, you have a question?
I have a question, Mayor, if I might.
Yeah, please, Julie.
Before we get into the specifics of the different options, I just had a general question, if I could.
Yeah, please go ahead.
When you mentioned about in the first 3 years, part of your responsibility is to determine how to correct the shortfall if there is a shortfall. I didn't see it in the slides here, but I understand that there's a mandatory 5% annual increase for all 20 years in the water bills, right? Is one of your solutions on how to resolve the shortfall that we would have to increase that 5%?
No, the 5% water rate increase is what we're basing our cash flow prospectus on to ensure that the project pays for itself. But if you were to, for example, increase it by 9%, then that extra 4% is yours to keep. But go ahead.
I just wanted to confirm that that wouldn't be one of the solutions, that we would be mandated to do that. And you would say, see, we've solved your problem.
No, not at all.
Okay, thank you.
You have complete control over your utility rates. We're just using that 5% increase as a prospectus to determine that this will pay itself back at that rate.
So what if it was only 4% that we increased them by?
That's a great question. So you have the flexibility to do that. However, that's a parameter outside of Schneider's control. So we're basing the revenue off of the accuracy of the meters. So the accuracy is really what we're measuring and not the utility rate increase. Did that answer your question? Okay. All right, go ahead, Kelsey.
Okay. So we'll start with option A. Option A will be a retrofit isolation. That just means we're measuring just the one scope of work, the one thing that is being done by Schneider. And then we're going to measure the key parameters of that scope of work. For lighting, you can think about the most important factor that we are changing about your lights is the wattage that they use. That's the main impacting variable that we will be changing. For the water meters, the main thing that we're changing is the accuracy. So it's easy to measure just that one variable to get a really, really good picture of the savings or the additional revenue that we are generating. So the way that that works is that field measurements are taken and combined with estimated values. And when I say estimated, have faith that those are researched, they are compared with your for energy example, they're compared with your utility bills to make sure that what we are estimating makes sense and lines up with the energy that you've actually been using. And then we pair those with measurements after the scope has been completed and hold those same parameters steady. So the only thing that will be changing is the measured value before and the measured value after, which for lighting would be wattage. For water meters would be accuracy. So that way we can factor out a lot of the other influencing factors that do affect the revenue or the utility spend and only focus on the thing that we changed and measure that accurately. So the good thing about option A is that the measurements only need to be taken once. We know that these water meters, for example, there's slide way down the line about the warranty. They're expected to maintain accuracy for 20 years within what, like 1% or 0.5%. They're supposed to stay accurate for a very, very long time. So we can have faith that that measurement we take is going to hold true for the duration of the contract. Same with lighting. LED lights last for a I won't say forever, but for a very, very long time. And they maintain that same wattage for a long time. So we can be confident that that measurement will hold up over the period of the guarantee. So as you can see at the bottom, the typical applications fit perfectly with the scope that we're putting in here. You can go to the next slide. Thank you.
I'll say one thing about the warranty. I apologize that information was not readily available at the last council meeting, so I made sure that was included in the packet this time. And I pulled out the two most important pieces of information as supplemental slides for your reference. So the manufacturer does guarantee an accuracy of plus or minus 1.5% for the full 20-year useful life cycle of their meters. So we're pretty confident that it's going to stay within that range. And if it doesn't, then you do have recourse with the manufacturer under warranty to get that corrected.
All right. The advantages of option A, I've kind of discussed those already. It's very cost effective. It's great for scope that is not going to be influenced by other things, like for lighting, you know, the heating and air conditioning in your building will have a very, very minimal effect on it. So we can safely isolate it from the other energy users in your buildings and measure it with option A. And it's also great for facility improvement measures or scopes of work with smaller savings amount because it is cost effective. The disadvantage is that because it is so isolated and that we're factoring out all of your other building energy users, what you see on your utility bills might not match up. So if you're running your facilities longer or you decide to cut your hours down, your utility bill is always going to reflect any changes that you make in your building, small or large. And so while the lighting savings should for sure show up, it will not show up in the same exact number when you compare one bill to the other. And I know that that can be a bit confusing to look at. So it's just good to clarify that up front, that it's going to vary in the exact number amount, but that is normal because we're isolating it so much. And then also another disadvantage is that the estimated parameters could be inaccurate. As I mentioned before, we do a lot of due diligence to make sure that those estimated parameters, like the amount of time that your lights are running and so on, that those are very accurate and that they line up with your actual utility spend for your baseline period.
Sure, go ahead.
Go ahead, Julie.
I don't understand, the retrofit is isolated. Can you go back and tell me what that means?
Of
I thought
course.
something about you would just test a random sample one time. Is that what isolated retrofit means?
Yes, so that would just mean that we're measuring only the retrofit or facility improvement measure or scope of work. I'm sorry that I'm using so many words to say the same thing, but we're only looking at that one scope that we're implementing. That's what the retrofit isolation is referring to. And the key parameter measurement part is what you mentioned about taking that random sample of measurement.
So the retrofit isolation means, for example, we're installing HVAC windows and lighting in this room. So if that were the case, then we would not be looking at other renovations that you would be making in this area. We're only isolating our savings to the scope that we are installing. Does that make more sense?
How does that affect the rest of the project, like the water meters? Is that included?
Yes.
So you test a few of them?
We can talk more here in a moment about how we go about our testing and verification upon install, but we're going to be verifying every water meter as we're installing it, and then also post install, creating a report saying this is the accuracy, this, making sure it's actually working and then providing that documentation to the city.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So when looking at the scope of work for this project, I try each one on with a different option and think about, is it a good fit? Is it not a good fit, and why? So I wanted to lay that out to be super clear with everyone. So we'll go scope by scope. I'm not going to do this for every option. Don't worry. I know this is a bit lengthy. There are some supplemental slides in this packet where you can look at my reasoning for the other options. But I wanted to spend some more time on option A since that is what we're recommending. So lighting is a great fit. If you read in the IPMVP, if you're looking for some light reading, it actually does recommend option A for lighting as like the standard approach that you would take because it makes sense almost all of the time. So that would be a perfect fit here. Now, whether or not the savings are large enough to justify this approach, we'll have to weigh that because the savings are pretty small compared to what it would cost to measure and verify them. That's something else that needs to be considered is, are the savings going to be smaller than what you're going to pay for us to measure them? And does that make sense? And typically, no, it does not make sense. But if you look at lighting as a general scope item, option A is a good fit. Lighting energy use remains steady. It's not influenced by the seasons. The lights go on and they use a certain wattage. They go off and they quit using wattage. Behavioral changes also don't affect the savings calculations. As I mentioned, we're isolating the lighting when we measure it like this. And so any behavioral changes are not going to show up as an effect from Schneider Electric changing out your lights. And that is the goal. We only want to measure what we are affecting. Moving on to the water meters. Again, this is a great approach. It's a great fit for option A because the accuracy of the meters can be measured with a minimal intrusion by measuring just a sample. So we want to disturb the least amount of people in their homes as possible when taking the sample of measurements. And option A is the approach where you take a sample of measurements. So that is a great fit. And then we can also isolate the accuracy as the one thing that we're measuring and changing, because the option A approach will not factor in any changes in water consumption because that's outside of our scope of work. We're not changing the amount of water that the people can use. We're not putting a cap on anyone's water, for example. We're only affecting the accuracy. So this would be a great approach to measure that. And also, since it is a one-time measurement, you can't measure the accuracy of a water meter continuously. It has to be physically removed, sent to a testing site, and then replaced. So you can't do a continuous measurement, which is required for some of these other options. For the windows, however, this would not be a good fit. There's no real way to isolate the energy use of a window, not that it uses energy, but that it prevents extra energy from being used by your air conditioning system. There's not really a way to measure that by itself, just the windows by themselves. So option A is a great method for scope that is going to have a steady use of energy or a steady accuracy for a very long time and can be measured using spot measurements, which is why it's a great fit for this project. So just a graphic of how the option A lighting would be calculated. It's just the measured power of the existing fixtures minus the measured power of the upgraded fixtures. And keep in mind, this is very, very general overview. Then we would apply the estimated parameters like your burn hours and any kind of HVAC impact. And then we would apply a contract utility rate to that so that, as has been mentioned before, if you change your rates, if you get a different utility rate, That's not something that we're influencing, and so that's not something that we want to unfairly measure. So we're going to stipulate a utility rate to be used, and that will all be in the contract. That will all be approved by the Colorado Energy Office as well.
And we do have projected utility rates from Colorado Springs Utilities for the next 5 years. So we actually took an even more conservative baseline than those new utility rates that are going to come into play for the next 5 years.
For the option A water meters calculation, it's a little bit more complicated than just one minus the other. So just in general, we'll measure the accuracy of the existing meters that's already been done. That's what we based our calculations on, and that's why we can be so sure of our projections of how your savings are going to look. Then we'll measure the accuracy of the upgraded meters after they've had a year to actually perform in the field. And we'll apply any kind of, we'll apply the baseline water consumption to that to compare the same amount of water use with the old meters versus the new meters and see what the impact of that scope of work was. And same on here, we would apply the contract utility rate. And just to address a question from earlier with that percent increase, that's why we have this contract utility rate, because whatever you decide to increase your rates to is up to you, and we don't influence that. So that's why we hold this steady, and it's in the contract, and it's got a set escalation that is conservative. So a little add-on that we have for this water meter project, it's called a revenue monitoring plan. This I want you to think of as separate from the option A. This is more of a service, more of an oversight, an extra set of eyes, analyzing your water data and seeing if there's anything that we need to look into, look at your revenue generated and see how's it looking? Is there any meter that we think needs to be inspected or maybe even replaced? As mentioned, this will just provide additional oversight and open communication with you on what your water usage is looking like and your revenue is looking like. This would be a semi-annual report that would include all the things listed there. I won't read them to you, but so we at Schneider can provide either additional training on the Temetra system. We could do these reports. You could monitor it on your own if you've got the time and desire to do that. That's all up to you. This is just kind of an additional service outside of the option A measurements and savings calculations that could be beneficial. Okay, so I will move on to option B, and I'll spend a little bit less time on B, C, and D because those aren't really applicable to the project, but I wanted to inform you on how they work and why they might not be applicable to this project. So option B is going to do the same as option A in that it's going to totally isolate the scope of work. However, with this option, you're not going to just measure one parameter, you're going to measure all the parameters. An easy way to understand this is, let's say you put a meter on a light bulb and you measured the kWh coming from that light bulb continuously over a set amount of time, then you would know the exact energy usage. Nothing's estimated. It's not spot measured one time. It's measured continuously over time. Well, it's not possible to put meters on all of your light bulbs. Unfortunately, that would require major electrical revamp and new panels and so on. So this approach is more suitable for solar generation, things that pretty much come with their own meters installed and that you can measure a continuous energy use. Also, as mentioned with the water meters, you can't measure accuracy in a continuous way, which would be required for this. So when I think option B, immediately my mind goes to solar generation or motor upgrades like in your fans. So option B, I would say not a good fit here. Great fit elsewhere, not here. The lighting, like I said, you would have to, I don't know if you would need to rewire all of your electric, but it would cost so much to measure this that it would not be worth doing the project. This would really not be a good use of money to use option B for lighting. Also, I've personally never seen it done. It's not good industry standard practice. It does require full energy metering instead of just measuring that one impacted parameter. So not great for lighting. Same for water meters. You can't measure accuracy like that. The meter has to be physically tested at a facility, so it can't be measured continuously. And then for windows, the same point as with option A, there's not really a way to isolate the energy saved by upgrading your windows, because they're not drawing power from an outlet. So it's a bit more complex than that. So method is best for PV, which already comes with its own meter and it's kind of plug and play. All right, if there are no more questions, I'll keep rolling on to option C. So option C is probably what you would first think of when you think to yourself, how am I going to measure the energy impact from Schneider Electric? Like if I had to do that by myself, what would be my first thought? At least for me, my first thought would be, well, let me look at my utility bills before the project and then after the project. That's pretty much what option C does. It's looking at your whole facility at the utility meter level. So it's looking at everything that's going on in your facility. This approach is great for if you've got multiple scopes of work or facility improvement measures, especially things that are going to change seasonally, like building automation that controls your temperature set points and your schedules that your building is running, or that in conjunction with lighting, mechanical, window. If you had a bunch of stuff going on and it saved a large amount, then this would be the option to use. So savings, we typically look for savings that are at least 10% of the baseline, and this allows us to know that what we're seeing on the utility bill has got to be from the work that we did. It's not just noise or small things that are going on in your facilities that are unrelated to us. It helps us be certain that what we're seeing is the scope that we implemented. This also requires continuous tracking throughout the performance period. And we adjust the baseline as mentioned in a slide, seems like a long time ago up at the top, where I mentioned wanting to factor out your occupancy, the weather, if it's a super hot or cold year. We don't want that to influence savings negatively or positively. We want to only measure what we put in. So that's where these adjustments come into place, so we keep everything as steady as absolutely possible. You can move on to the next slide, please. As mentioned, there are supplementary slides later on where you can see why I would say that option C is not the choice here. Number one, savings just aren't large enough for the energy efficiency side. And number two, it requires continuous measurement, which, as mentioned, not possible for accuracy. All right, option D, this would be a calibrated simulation. This would be if you put option C into a computer model. You can think of it that way. So we're also looking at a whole building. We're looking at multiple scopes of work, all interacting with each other, changing seasonally, but we're doing it in a model instead of analyzing the utility bills and doing all the math behind the baseline to get it steady with the conditions of today. So this can be like a more cost-effective way if you wanted to do option C and you had the scope and the savings that could justify it. This can also work for buildings that don't have a baseline. That's not really relevant here, but it's just a different way for if you really want to measure something and nothing else will really fit. Can be kind of a workaround. So it's best suited for meters that we would just love to option C, but that don't have quite enough savings to justify that.
Okay, so the proposed MMV plan that we have put together for you, we did evaluate lighting to see if option A would make sense, but overall, the lighting savings annually came in about $3,800 or $3,900 a year. It's fairly minimal in the grand scheme of the entire project. So we thought rather than eating up your minimal lighting savings with additional work and reporting on our side, we'll just let you keep those in your pocket. We're pretty confident. I mean, LED lights are fairly simple and they're really efficient compared to what you have here. So we're pretty confident you're still going to get those savings, but we would not recommend that we add these to our measurement and verification plan just due to the cost and resources required. For windows, we talked about how it's hard to measure the energy impact of those. We do know it will help with comfort and it will eventually help with things like energy efficiency, not letting, hot air leak outside into the cold. So we're not going to measure the window impact necessarily, but we do expect that you're going to see some benefits from those. For HVAC, we're actually adding an air conditioning and heating unit where it didn't exist before. So that actually negatively affects the energy savings impact of this project. And we certainly don't want to take any savings away from you. So just know that if we do put the HVAC unit in here, you have air conditioning where it doesn't exist now. Your utility bill may be a little bit higher in the hotter summer months, but this is also a benefit for being able to rent this space out year round and have everybody be more comfortable. So we wouldn't be measuring that necessarily. And then the water meters, we definitely would recommend option A. That is the industry standard for water meters. That said, there are some risks around the variability of the number of active meters. We've definitely gone through with the billing staff and audited all of the active accounts to the best of our ability. But as we know, people move and things change, or, if a home or residence burns down or something like that, that could affect just the number of active meters that you have in your portfolio. And then, we also talked about the customer behavioral changes. Obviously, we can't control how long of a shower someone takes or if they decide to start watering their lawn this year. But those could introduce some fluctuations in the overall revenue. And then, of course, we talked about the water utility rate increases. We're basing our financial pro forma off of that 5% increase year over year, but ultimately it's up to you. And, obviously keep doing your rate case studies to make sure that you're on track with where you need to be. But we won't impose any mandates on water utility rate increases for you. And then the telecommunications savings, those are all yours to keep. Schneider has no contractual involvement with the IT and the phones and all the other services that we had our partner evaluate. So we don't have any control over those, but you can certainly work with our partner Blue Wave on a regular basis to make sure you're negotiating those contracts and making sure that you're getting the best services for the best cost. And then we have included some maintenance and operational savings as another way to help this project pay for itself over time. There are things like the cost avoidance of replacing meters. Theoretically, these should last for the full 20 years with that 1.5% variance in accuracy. Right now, Sean and his team are replacing failed meters at an increasing rate. That obviously costs money from a parts and labor perspective. So we're not necessarily measuring those, but we did include a very conservative amount of those savings. But we all feel that you're going to get a lot of benefit from the water meters being upgraded to the cellular system. So it's a lot less manual. Things are more automated. It's going to free up a lot of time for the water staff. So all of this will be in the contract so that we all understand what our responsibilities are on both sides and what we're measuring and what we're not.
Okay, thank you. And with that, council, excuse me, you're finished?
Yep,
I thought-
that's all. So we
Okay.
can take questions if
Yeah, okay,
you
so
like.
time for questions and comments, council? Do you have anything? Judith?
I just had a warranty question.
Yes.
So you mentioned that the meter company guarantees a certain percentage. Could you say what that is again of
Absolutely.
accuracy on their meters?
I do. I have a slide at the very end for you here. So here's
couldn't-
the warranty information from the manufacturer with that prorated schedule that you had asked about at the last meeting. And then here is the meter accuracy statement from the manufacturer.
So in the first 10, I'm not talking about the second 10 years. I'm just talking about the first 10 years of the warranty. If a meter needs to be replaced, the manufacturer in the first 10 years will pay a prorated amount of the actual meter, depending on when the claim is made. But it is the cost to the city. It costs the city must remove the defective device, even though it's defective on the manufacturer's side. So the city must pay for removing the defective device and also installing a new one. So does Schneider take into account those costs that we bear for a defective, having to pull out and install a defective device in our overall cost savings?
No, we do not account for that.
Okay, so
Uh,
that's just a cost the city just bears as with going with this.
Of course. But, you know, after the initial installation, especially that first year, we're going to be doing a deep dive on everything during our first year of measurement and verification. We'll be able to tell very quickly if a meter's not operating properly, and we'll be able to assist the city with that warranty claim. However, the labor would be on the city water department to do that change out.
What I'm requesting of the city, if that does occur, I want to know what that cost is. I want to know if we have to pull out and replace a meter. I want to know how much that costs. I mean, right now you're saying it's cost $12,000 a year to maintain the system as a whole. So I'll be very curious to see how we take a look at that with regards to factoring that into our overall savings. Thank you.
The $12,000 is just the materials cost for failed meters, so that does not include any labor. But we can work on getting that figure for you.
Other questions or comments? I had a question. You talked about taking sampling the water meters, and that was under option A and I think other ones as well. How big a sample do you take?
Typically 1 to 2% is industry average. So we got a 1% sample during our initial testing period. So we're going to be targeting closer to that 2% mark if it's possible.
2%. We got, I think, somewhere 2,200 to 2,300 meters. So
About
somewhere
40 to
in that range.
50 would be
40,
ideal.
40, 50. Okay. Seems like a larger sampling population wouldn't hurt. That's my observation. It seems like we'd have greater confidence in the system with a larger sampling population, but
Of course, yes. It is obviously disruptive to have to schedule those appointments with water customers and get into their homes. So we'll try to be as efficient with that process as possible.
thank you. Other questions or comments from council? Julie?
Can you explain, under maintenance and operating savings, under the proposed M&V plan for Manitou, the responsibilities section says that we would have to come to a mutual agreement on M&O savings, usually 3% of construction cost. Can you explain that?
Yes. So as of now, and Tyler, correct me if I'm wrong, but we've included $10,000 of annual maintenance and operational savings in your cash flow. And again, there's $12,000 a year being spent just on parts and materials to replace failed meters. So we've taken a very conservative approach to that. Typically, The industry standard is 3% of the total cost of the construction, but we felt that was a bit inflated for Manitou Springs, so we kept it much more on the conservative side. So that can also include things like the fuel cost savings by not having a water meter employee driving around to pick up meter reads every month. The cost of the wear and tear on those vehicles to be driven around for that purpose. We won't need to necessarily do that anymore. So that's a maintenance and operating cost savings.
So we save $10,000 and how much do we pay you?
The $10,000 in savings that you get from maintenance and operations savings, that's essentially costs that you're avoiding in the future by having a working system. So you don't have to pay us anything extra for that. That's just a cost savings we include, like the energy savings from the lights and the additional revenue from the more accurate meters.
So when it says come to mutual agreement on M&O savings, usually 3%, those are just your estimated savings that the city would save on all of these projects, not have nothing to do with a payment to your business. Is that
Correct.
right?
That's correct.
And that 3%, that the 10,000 or 3% of construction costs includes all of the projects that you would be overseeing?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
The one clarification on that, the 10,000 is included in the cash flow calculations. So we are being conservative, so there should be more theoretically that would go back to the city's bottom line. But for our cash flow purposes of how is the city going to generate the savings to make the payment for the project every year, we're including $10,000 from that M&O savings.
So we end up paying that 10,000 to Snyder.
No, that $10,000 is how much you're saving by having a better working system so that your water crews or, Roy's crews don't have as much work to do. They don't have as many emergency calls or, breakdowns to respond to. So those are the savings specifically for staff. Okay.
Anything else, council? Denise, is there anything that you can think of that, okay. Well, I guess we know a lot more about measurement and verification than we used to.
Probably more than you ever cared to, but we felt it was important for you to understand that. So thank you all for your time. And we are on the agenda for the Historic Preservation Committee to have the HVAC and windows approved May 7th. That was the soonest they could get us on the agenda. So we're in close contact with all of our suppliers and vendors. We have LOIs that we've been able to secure in the last week, especially with tariff talks, to ensure that we can get this done in a very timely fashion. And so the expectations will be here for the May 20th meeting for final contract approval. So we're working closely with Denise and Roy and Cassandra on a communications plan to make sure the community knows what's coming and get their questions answered. So we've got lots of moving parts, but we're confident we can get it done in that time frame.
Great. Well, thank you very much.
Okay, thank
Appreciate
you.
it. Okay. Our next item is a presentation and discussion on improvement options for the Ruxton Corridor. This is an update from February 11th. We had a work session then. And so tonight we have Glenn Ellis from JR Engineering, who's going to brief us on this.
Yeah, Mayor, I'll do a quick introduction. As you know, we presented this a couple of weeks ago, about a month and a half ago, and you had several questions. We wanted to bring those answers back. And Glenn has been our engineer on this project since the beginning. So he and I met, he watched your presentation, listened to the questions, and has some additional information. One of the things that you did ask for is the itemized cost of each of the options. So we were able to provide that for you. Glenn did some estimating for that. So with that, I'll just turn it over to Glenn.
Thank you, Denise. Can you hear me pretty good? Sometimes I like to
Yes.
lean back. but-
Yeah, generally, if you're about 3 inches from
3
your mouth
inches,
to
all right.
the microphone, that works pretty well.
As Denise said, I'm Glenn Ellis with JR Engineering. I've been the project manager for this project probably 4 or 5 years now, back when Dole was working with the city. And so don't hold that against me since I've been on this thing almost from the beginning of design, but as has been stated in the past, there's a lot that has gone into this project, a lot of complexities, lots of things to think about and discuss. Let's make sure I can get through this unless they turn it off. Well, the button, I mean, it's lighting up when I push it. Yeah, I may need you to help on that. All right, so the purpose of the presentation this evening is to provide an update on the information that was provided last time, provide more clarity, and also to go through a couple of additional options that have been evaluated that I looked at for additional consideration as you think about the different improvements and limits of the project. I'm going to keep trying just in case. Was that me? Okay, thank you. So highlighting a couple of the topics, again, answer questions from the prior meeting or any that have come up in between. Provide an overview of the current funding and design of the project. Review the options that are on the table at this point, and to hopefully receive direction from you guys as to which manner we want to proceed in. Okay, one of the questions that was discussed in topics of conversation last time was the cost for the secondary connections and easements. And I know that Andrew had indicated that he had tried to get information from contractors and they were, unable to provide information just because they don't have a design prepared. And really it is a case by case basis based on where you are in the corridor, what property you're dealing with, where the services are coming from, are they on a pole on the north side or the south side? So there's a lot of variableness to that. What I did, and it's reflected in the estimates that you have, is I looked at what some of the costs were on the MAPS project on Manitou Avenue. I know some of those are probably closer to the corridor. They didn't have to go under a creek, but I believe those were averaged about $8,000 a piece. And there were about 8 or 9 of those properties. And I only recognize that because those were paid under what we call a force account. So it wasn't like a bid item up front. The project had kind of a set dollar amount of, hey, we're going to pay, we have a bucket of money that we're going to pay for these services, and we'll pay it as the work occurs. And so that's when it was brought to the attention of the city, and we would review it and that sort of thing. And so those were about $8,000 a piece averaged. I just kind of inflated that. I mean, 25,000 a piece is what I did per property along the corridor. And then for easements, those would be temporary easements to allow the contractor to get in there, tear up the property, dig it up, and basically you're renting the property so that the contractor can do that. The variableness on that is what type of improvements they're ripping out and have to restore. I put a $3,000 limit on those as well. So again, those could change, but it's really an average, and it's something to set a baseline on. So hopefully that covers the thoughts or questions you had at the time. As we go through this, certainly feel free to ask any questions along the way. What I'd like to do is I go through the different options and maybe get through one option and then allow you to ask questions, and then before we get into the next one. But are there any questions related to these secondary connections or easements?
Any questions, council? Guess not. Let's push on.
All right, thank you. There was another question specific about the telecom franchise agreements, and we were able to track that information down, and I've highlighted there specifically as it relates to relocations. This same paragraph appears in both of the telecom, Comcast and I believe CenturyLink, so they're pretty much mirrored. And so basically what this means is if you're paying CSU to underground their system, then you've got to reimburse the telecom likewise. I've seen other agreements that state that it's still under their cost. And so it really is just where you're at and what municipality you are and how you set up these agreements. But that is how what we found. And so the cost to the city for undergrounding is really an unknown. They would have to design their system, tell us what they need. We don't believe that the cost would be as extensive, obviously, as the undergrounding of the power, because you don't have transformers, you don't have those large vaults and so forth. You just have, smaller vaults where they just have splicing equipment inside and whatnot. But I did provide a cost on those as well. I don't know off the top of my head, but and it really is location dependent, and I think really the needs of the consumers out there. So like up in the COG area, the needs, they don't have as many services, obviously, but you still got it underground. And so that main infrastructure is the same. The service costs is really an unknown. But so those, if you see in there, and I can explain a little more on some of those units if you had any questions as to how those were generated. But again, those would be dependent on the company doing the design and what the current systems are out there and the needs of every user. Any questions on that before I move on? All right, thank you.
Guess not.
There was a question, I believe this came up afterwards, that was conveyed to me. Can a sidewalk be installed between Pilot Knob and the incline entrance? I'll describe the incline entrance really as that point at the end of those homes and the chateau where you make that split, where you turn left and circle back around the chateau. That's what I call the incline entrance. And so the photos there, the one on the left is heading to the west towards the chateau, right before the curve. You can see that you got the delineators to delineate the walkway there from the roadway. And then the one on the right is in the one-way section where the roadway narrows down, has the delineators there. And there's really, I show those two slides because there's two ways that those have to be handled. On the one on the right, that open area, or the one on the left, sorry, we can put in a curb gutter and sidewalk because we've got the width of the roadway. We've got enough room there to allow 2 lanes of traffic to flow. So we can install curb and gutter and a sidewalk that's raised up. The current plan, I mean, it hasn't been designed or anything, but the current plan is that it would be a 7-foot sidewalk through that section. And then on the section on the right, which is the one way, that roadway is very narrow. It's about 17, 18 feet wide. And the plan indicates that there would be a colored section of concrete to kind of delineate the roadway from the sidewalk. And then there would be a 5-foot sidewalk. And it would have no curb and gutter because of the fire requirements. You need to have an unobstructed area of at least 20 feet. That allows if there's a fire truck operating on the side of the road at a fire hydrant or whatever, there's still a passable area adjacent to it. And so obviously we're restricted currently as it stands, but adding that curb and gutter in that section would restrict that area even more. And so the plan, even from when this corridor was studied many years ago, that exhibit there that I show comes directly out of that plan. And so that's really the plan that we would be moving forward with. It's a narrower sidewalk, but you'd still have a little bit of room if people wanted to get on the colored area. But that colored area there is really delineated from the roadway. And so I've indicated there with some lengths and whatnot. The sidewalk itself on that section would also have to be thicker than standard sidewalk thickness. Standard is 4 inches. This would be 6 inches. That's just because you would have the vehicle traffic, potentially the fire truck driving on it. And you wouldn't want it to be thinner to potentially break up. So with those costs and those dimensions, I've got an estimate of just under 200,000 to do that. You'd be removing the asphalt. You'd remove some curb and gutter and sidewalk that's on the south side near Pilot Knob. And then the other estimate is if, hey, if we wanted to go and also resurface it and make it all kind of come together and look nice, it'd be about 275,000 with the mill and overlay. So. Any questions on that? Okay. Now this slide here just kind of shows the overall original limits of the project so that when the city went to the state for funding, the limits were from Manitou Avenue to the COG, and that's really as descriptive as it got in terms of the limits. Now, when it went out to RFP for engineering, Dole had put the western terminus at the bar, at the hydro plant, the access to the bar parking lot. And so that was his interpretation of the COG. It could be interpreted as stopping short of the COG, but that's the road he took. And so when we prepared our proposal and our cost estimate, that was the limits that we had worked from. And we did enter into a contract with the city to provide preliminary design from Manitou Avenue up into the hydro plant. And right now, based on some adjustments, based on direction that we were provided, the scope changed to only provide design from Hydro Street to New York Avenue. And that was really to align with CSU at the time. It was already in the process of designing the undergrounding from Hydro to New York to kind of align with the COGS improvements that they had made. So that was the revised scope. And so currently we have 50% design ready to go to CDOT for review, which includes all of those things there: new curb, gutter, and sidewalk, new water, new sanitary, and a new storm sewer system, new asphalt paving. And the difference between this new asphalt paving and the other asphalt paving in the other estimates is this pavement would, rip out all the existing, go down to the subgrade, recompact and stabilize the existing subgrade, and then put new asphalt paving on it. Underground all the electrical and then add street lighting. And our current estimate at this point is $8.25 million. As you see in that table, which was discussed last time around, the city received 4.4 million of federal funding with the city match of 917. So 5.3 million is available for the entire corridor. And as you can see there in yellow, you have currently about 4.8 million remaining for design and construction of the project. So I just kind of want to give a little background of that. The cost estimates, I think that 5.3 million was part of the initial study that was done. And there might have been some elements included or not included at the time. I don't believe it included like new water line and new sanitary sewer. I think it was more of the infrastructure roadway. Because of the funding source was CDOT Surface Transportation Funds, which alludes to it's got to be transportation related. So that was kind of the key of some of those elements that needed to be improved and the costs associated with it. Sure. Oh, yeah.
Go
I'll go
ahead, Julie.
back.
Can you walk me through that chart? So grant amount, what's funding agency balance mean?
So that is the CDOT portion. So the funding agency is CDOT. So the grant amount, that first 4.4 million, that was how much was awarded from CDOT. And then the balance remaining is how much has, obviously what's been spent already, but that's available currently from CDOT, as I understand it.
And the balance remaining,
The 4.0.
the balance remaining is how much we would be owed under this particular proposal?
That is current funding regardless of what option you select.
Okay, and what's COM's city fund balance?
So that's the city's portion, their match. So typically it's an 80% federal, 20% city match. So that would be the city's obligated amount. And so it
What does
was
COM stand for?
City of Manitou Springs.
Oh, God, thank you. Okay, I was trying to figure that out. All right. And then the total grant balance?
And so that's a combination of both the city and the state funding. So that's how it's put
So
together.
when the city is using its own money of just under $1 million there, that's called a grant?
Yeah, so part of the grant requirements is that, hey, if we're going to give you money, you got to put forward 20% of the total project cost as a match.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So the total grant, including the matching
Yes,
funds?
yeah. So yeah, it's kind of,
Okay.
yeah, so you have to look at it that way as your funding is part of the match. It's just the way the state programs it. So with that, because what happens is when you pay us, for instance, you're paying us 100% of our bill, but then you're turning around and invoicing CDOT for 80% of what you paid us. So they'll give you 80%, but you're obligated to pay 20% of that. And that's, like I said, that's how they program it. And there are some funding sources out there that you can use as matches. So there's, other grants that you could get that potentially could cover your 20%. It just depends on the project and
Kind of like
availability.
medical insurance,
I'm sorry, what's that?
kind of like medical
Yeah,
insurance.
that's right. Yeah.
Your copay.
Yep.
But so you're estimating that that Manitou's portion would be that 917,000. What's the part that's in yellow? What does that mean?
Well, so that's really what's remaining. So
Remaining
what-
from what?
from what has been approved from CDOT. So CDOT has said, hey, we're going to give you $4.4 million. Right now, you've spent enough that you only have 4 million left to spend. And that's not based on really any estimate. That's just saying, hey, we're giving you this money. If you spend it, great. If you spend 3 million, you only get 3 million. And then the rest will go back in their buckets to fund other projects statewide.
And the balance remaining for the cities, 835,000, what's that?
Well, that's basically, so the city said, okay, we're gonna get 4.4, we'll set aside 917,000.
Mhm.
They've spent approximately 80,000 already of that, so that's what's left over that the city has promised to pay for the projects.
Thank you.
John, did you want to
I
speak?
have a question for you. So the difference in the first column between those two, that's about 392,000. Where did that go?
That's to pay us for our design.
Okay, and that was only for the portion in front of the cog?
All the way from Hydra to New York Avenue, yes.
All the way to what?
To New York Avenue.
Okay, so to New York Avenue. So just that portion is the design part. Okay, thank you.
Right. Okay, so now I'm going to go into the options. I know you've already heard options A through D on the prior presentation, but you got those same options here plus a couple other ones. The A through D are the same as what Andrew presented. I'm going to go through them, maybe provide a little additional information, but nothing has really changed in terms of the limits, the work being done. You will recognize that there are differences in the cost, and I can kind of give a
Yeah.
overview of that, but
Glenn, I think it would be helpful just to touch briefly on those first four options, the one that Andrew had already presented, because I think we just would benefit from a refresher. And then if we have to fill in gaps, we'll ask questions.
yeah, no, so certainly, yeah, I'll go through each of those options again. Just so that, yeah, there is some clarity there. So options A and B, and I list them same on this slide just because they have the same limits, Hydra Street to New York Avenue, and those align with what we're currently working on for a full design. And so that exhibit there, it's got the red line kind of giving a general overview of that area there. So that project for option A, from New York Avenue to Hydra Street would be to underground the electrical and the telecom. We would do a mill and overlay. So that's just, removing maybe 2 inches of asphalt, putting 2 inches of asphalt back, structurally lining the sanitary sewer system, adding some walkability enhancements, really just signage and replacing some of those delineators out there. Adding new streetlights that would be coming with the undergrounding. There would not be any water or any storm sewer improvements at all. And so you'll see in some of the other slides that there are some of those, but I wanted to highlight that there's none of those on there. So with the city's aging system, there, those improvements would not be made. So there's the potential that, a year after or even 2 months after the project that you could have a water main break or something like that, just to highlight that. And so that's estimated at 4.9 million. So because we pulled out the water, we pulled out the storm sewer, we modified the asphalt work. It brought the cost from the original 8 point whatever million that we had currently estimated. It's down to 4.9 million. And then, so I generated some pros and cons, and obviously there could be some others just based on what perspective and in the context of the improvements. But obviously the pros, you're getting your underground conversion, which I know is a high priority for the city. You have an upgraded sanitary system. You get new street lighting, new pavement surface, and it fits right within the existing budget. I mean, it squeaks right under there. The cons are that it only provides a benefit for that COG in the incline area. The remainder of the corridor remains as is, so there's no improvements east of New York Avenue. There's no new storm or water systems installed. We would have to revise some of our design that's already been done to remove some of the elements that we designed in there, such as the water, the sewer, the curb and gutter and all that. We'd have to pull that out of the design and tie everything back into, the design or the existing grades that are out there currently. So, so those are, quick overview of the pros and cons. And like I said, I touched on the cost. Your packet should have the actual cost estimate of how I've developed those costs. If there's any questions on the cost or any of those elements, I'm open at this time for option A.
Any questions on option A?
I'm just
Judith?
assuming that all of these cost estimates are pre-tariff. I mean, this,
Yeah.
this could really change.
Yeah, I haven't been involved yet with projects that have actually gone to bid. It's a short period. So yeah, it's hard to
So
decipher what that
factor
could
that
be.
question mark in. Thank you.
Yeah. And hopefully by the time we actually start construction on this, all that'll be under the bridge and we'll be back to normal, but never know. John,
Yeah, so on page 85 on your matrix, on option A, you didn't have an X on sanitary sewer lining, but you do on your slide. Is that just a typo?
it is, yes. Thank you.
Okay, I just verifying. Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
I'm sorry. So which is correct?
So the slide 13, the option A or slide 12, under this option where it does talk about the sanitary sewer lining, that is correct. So yeah, it's just missing an X on that matrix. Oh, sorry about that. Yeah.
On
Okay.
page 85.
So yeah, and it's a lot of clicks for me to get to there, but yeah, if you can do that, we do have a matrix that kind of goes through all the options with the different improvements and the different, yes, this is included and whatnot. So
Thank you.
yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Okay. Any other questions on A?
I guess not. Let's go ahead with B.
Okay. So B again is the same limits, Hydra Street to New York Avenue. This option would leave the electrical, all those poles as is. And then we would still do the mill and overlay, so you'd have new asphalt out there. We would be able to add curb gutter and sidewalk through that section. Again, we would line the sewer system. We would add new sanitary manholes. I believe Andrew said that they're brick currently, so we would rip out the bricks and put in the new recast concrete ones. There would be new storm sewer, and that primarily would be in front of the COG at the existing shelter area where people wait to take the shuttle. There's a system there. There's a system. I mean, if you're walking up there and you're at the COG entrance, you'll see that pipe that kind of hangs out over the sidewalk. That system would go underground. And then there's drainage out towards the bridge at near the chateau as well. That would be improved. And then there would be new water valves and fire hydrants. And I don't know exactly the locations of those. I believe Andrew worked with Sean to determine where those needed to be and how many, but those are included. I think, well, I do have the number. I just don't know exactly where those would be. And so that cost is 2.9, just about $3 million. I do seem to recall, I don't have Andrew's numbers in front of me, but I do recall it seemed to be a little higher, much higher than that. And so what I had done is I looked through his estimate and I noticed that the undergrounding, or he had costs in there for streetlights and undergrounding for the entire corridor. And so there was that component, and I think he had some other line items that were just that were off. And so I just tried to correct them based on my expectations and my experience of what they should be. And so that's what brought the cost down. So so this one would fit within the budget clearly. So there would be the potential to either extend the limits based on this option or do some other improvements along the way. But
So Glenn, I have a question for you. Does this include the sidewalk in that corridor?
so it includes that, you saw that one picture that showed
Yes.
the colored, yeah, it
On
would
Winter
include that.
Street.
Yeah, on Winter
So
Street.
what is the sidewalk configuration from essentially the incline to Hydro?
So that one's a little more tricky. I mean, so we would have to squeeze one in there and still work with the COG as to, because there's parking currently, there wants to be a right turn lane into the parking lot. So that one, there is some intermittent. I think we still do keep the sidewalk on the south side. That's there up to the building, and then we would cross it onto the north side. You're making me dig deep into my memory here. All the way up to the hydro plant, I think we may have just left it asphalt. I'm not 100% certain on that,
Okay,
but
so basically from the point where the buses turn in and everybody else turn in, it's pretty sketchy as far as the sidewalk further on up there because there's somewhat kind of diagonal parking and parallel parking in that area further
Yeah.
on up.
yeah, and the understanding really is that there's not, I mean, I guess there are users that come down. I mean, because when you go up the COG, you're not supposed to come down the COG, you're supposed to come down the trail. I know that Dole at one time had thought about maybe working with the COG to add sidewalk through the parking lot up to the incline so that you wouldn't have to have that additional sidewalk up to the hydro, but that really didn't get vetted through all the way. But yeah, that's kind of,
Okay.
yeah.
You answered my questions. Thank you.
Okay. So jumping into the pros and cons, I mean, a lot of these are going to be the same throughout all these options. You got your upgraded sanitary sewer, you have new water valves, new hydrants, you have new pavement service. Excuse me, new curb gutter and sidewalk and new storm sewer system. And this one clearly fits within the budget. The cons obviously though are you're only benefiting a select area. The remainder again of the corridor is left as is. The poles remain, although there may be the possibility as we're going through design of looking at each one of those poles individually and saying, hey, can we move this one out of the way so that we can get our sidewalk or whatever improvement in there? There would be a cost associated with that, but we'd have to work through that. And right now it's really a concept that hasn't been vetted through or discussed too deeply with CSU on. We would have to revise our existing design again, and again, there's no new water main. So it really depends on, some of these cons may not really matter that much, just depends on your priorities. I mean, do you want a new water main? Then it would be a con. If you're okay with what you got, then it may not score that highly on that, con list. Any questions on B? Anything else? Okay. Options C and D are from New York Avenue to Manitou Avenue, and that really just closes the corridor limits. And they're listed again, A and D or C and D, just because one's got the undergrounding and one doesn't. Option C is we're kind of flipping this way. We're leaving the overhead along the entire corridor. We're milling and overlaying. We're adding curb, gutter, and sidewalk. We're doing the sanitary sewer lining again. We're replacing the sanitary manholes. This time we're leaving the storm sewer system in place, but only replacing the inlets. Those have deteriorated over time, so we're going to replace those. And then at selected locations, we would add water valves and fire hydrants. And that's cost is coming in at about $4.4 million. Pros and cons, again, upgraded sanitary system, new water valves, fire hydrants, new pavement service, curb gutter sidewalk. You get new inlets and you get new manholes, and it benefits a good majority of the corridor. The cons are that you still have the poles in the way that we'd have to work around. You would need additional funding, which I think that might be left over because I went through multiple iterations on these cost estimates, and so I just didn't update that con. So the 4.4 million does fit within your current budget, so we can strike that actually. We would have to do design. No design has been done yet on this segment at all, and you would not get water or storm a new system through that corridor. Any questions on C?
So that includes that raised sidewalk from Pilot Knob up to New York.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And then D is undergrounding the entire corridor from New York Avenue to Manitou Avenue. Andrew had about 4 to 5 million for the undergrounding of the electrical, so I kind of split the difference there and put it at 4.5. I added about $1 million for the telecom, and really that's just a guess, my best guess. We'd have to have some conversations with those companies to see if they have I'm sure they do budgetary, estimating, and they should be able to provide a cost, but we just didn't get into that at this time. And I've got 2.5 million to do the secondary connections, and the easements, and that's really associated with kind of the maximum of 100 properties out there. I tried to tally it, and there's wires that go everywhere, so you really can't follow every one of them. So there could be a wire that goes 2 properties deep. I really don't know. So that's without really working with CSU and doing an analysis of every single property, walking it and looking at the needs. The one key on this one though, and I had to get confirmation with CDOT because I know there was talk last time about, well, can we, we're going to use funds, let's just do the undergrounding. That's the priority. But because of the funding source, we could not just use this money solely for undergrounding. It has to be associated with a surface improvement. So if you're replacing the sidewalk and the pole's in the way, the pole can go underground, or it can go underground and the project will pay for it. But if you're milling and overlaying and you're not touching anything that would impact the poles, then it would not qualify. So I wanted to highlight that this option really isn't an option to utilize solely for CDOT funding. Obviously, there are still improvements. You would get street lighting, but obviously you wouldn't get the rest of the improvements along the corridor that are desired and what really is programmed into the funding that you receive from CDOT. And I put that at about 14.8 million. And the pros and cons on this one are, the pros are you're undergrounding, you get new streetlights, and it benefits most of the corridor up to New York Avenue. The cons, there's no other improvements being made, and you can't use CDOT money to fund it. All right, if there's no questions on that, I'll jump in. The next 2 options are really, yeah, sure.
Julie, go ahead. Yeah, Julie, that's fine. Go ahead.
This, I just don't know. If you're replacing a sidewalk and installing, the gutters, does that mean you have to also do an asphalt resurface?
No, you don't have to. Yeah.
And if we just replace the sidewalk, is that something that would give us CDOT money without resurfacing?
Yeah, because it accomplishes the goal because when looking at, I mean, CDOT probably has a couple ways they can interpret the scope of the project. When you look at the title of the project, it says Ruxton Avenue pedestrian and drainage improvements. That's the title. So the scope that they would expect is that you're going to make improvements to the sidewalk. And naturally, when you replace a sidewalk, they've got inlets in there, the storm sewer systems, and so you're going to replace those at the same time. So bare minimum, those are really the crux of the project. The roadway portion of it, it aligns with the surface transportation component of the program itself. So it would qualify, but it's not necessary.
So does that mean we would have the option under option A of undergrounding and curb and gutter and sidewalk and no asphalt resurface? That would be one of our options if we wanted to apply that extra money for asphalt resurface towards something different?
I think
Or does that not
so.
really make sense? If you can walk me through that.
No, I mean, you can do the project without doing this resurfacing. And maybe I don't fully understand. So are you saying instead of using the resurfacing money in that area, spend it on
Something else.
something else? So
Because, I mean, I'm just thinking, oh my goodness, all this is for, the cog area, the cog already, enough with the cog, The residents want some relief. So I was just wondering if we could, but however, I'm also personally very interested in undergrounding, which I think benefits all of us, no matter which part of Rexton that's on. I mean, visually it's nicer for the cog, but it's safer for all of us. So I was just wondering if we looked at option A, but we added the column that isn't here about sidewalk, curb and gutter and eliminated the X under asphalt resurface, what that might do to the cost of the program, or if it's negligible, I don't know.
yeah, I mean,
I don't know how expensive it is to do what you described about tearing up the whole road, right down to the
yeah.
bones and starting all over again.
So we have about, I'd say maybe up to 300,000 in that New York to Hydra Street for resurfacing. So that 300,000, yeah, you can put towards, extending the sidewalk further down, maybe to, Pilot Knob and even beyond, but you'd want to, I feel, make sure that it's a logical terminus point so that you're not like, oh, we've got 300,000, but it only takes us to, I don't know, mid-block or something. I
Or
don't
use
know.
it for anything else
Sure.
further below, not necessarily one or two things,
Yeah.
but we're only talking about 300K, but that's helpful to know.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'll continue. So option E really is the entire corridor. So it aligns with the scoping terminus that was originally part of the funding that was allocated. And then, so the improvements or non-improvements are really associated with what's listed here. So we would leave the overhead in place. We would mill and overlay. So the components are pretty much the same. It's just some of the limits are changing. New curb and gutter and sidewalk. We're structurally lining the sanitary, new sanitary manholes, new fire hydrants and water valves, and the new storm sewer system. And we've got that at about $7.9 million. So this gives you the kind of, we scaled down the scope already on the 4 other options. So I basically just took that same approach and extended it for the entire corridor. So that like I said, puts us at 7.9 million. So, and the pros and cons are going to be the same as some of those other options. I think the only differential is on the pro side is your entire corridor is covered. You're not focusing solely and taking care of one segment of the populace up there. You're covering everybody out there, and everyone will feel happy and smiley.
Does that include sidewalks?
It
Curb and
does. Yeah, new curb, gutter and sidewalk. Yep. The cons would be the overhead poles would remain, and what we would have to do during design is really just, like I mentioned earlier, is are there certain poles that we can move? Are there areas that we can move them to so that we can still have our sidewalk and not have a pole in the middle of the sidewalk? Because really having that pole in the middle does defeat the purpose of making these improvements. So we would have to work with CSU. Some of them, for instance, would be easier than others. If it's just kind of like a pass-through pole where you just have your overhead lines just go from the pole downstream to upstream, and it's just in the middle to carry the sag on it. That probably could occur, I don't know the cost, but fairly simply. I mean, I'm not an electrical guy, but as opposed to the maximum is if you had transformers on a pole, and then those transformers then feed streetlights or homes, relocating one of those poles would have a significant cost. In relationship to the other pole relocations, and you would probably have less of a confined area of where you could move it to. You might be able to, it might take two poles to replace just the one pole. I'm speaking from just limited experience, but that's kind of my understanding of what that we would have to look at and kind of work through with CSU. So any questions on E? Okay, so option F is from Manitou Avenue up to the incline. And again, it's got the same components that we've talked about on all the others. Your overhead remains, mill and overlay. Lining your sewer, manholes, you get new ones, you get new storm sewer system, and you get new water valves and hydrants. And that's coming in at about 5.9 million. And then the pros and cons, again, the same. It benefits the majority of the corridor minus the cog. And I'm trying to think if there's anything really different about this one other than just the limits of the project itself and a little less expensive to do. Yeah.
Go ahead, Julie.
What's the difference between new storm sewer and storm sewer inlets?
Sure. So when we just replace the inlet, so that's the drainage collection that's at the curb and gutter. So the water comes from the gutter, dumps into that inlet, and then from there it goes in the pipe into the creek. That would just be replacing that box, that inlet. And the system is the additional piping that connects the inlets together in the manholes. That's a new system. Yep. Okay, and I know Nancy had a question.
That was my question.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Does which of these categories would apply to when you're lining the sewer line? Was that the new storm sewer?
That's the sanitary sewer.
Oh, there it is.
Yep.
Thank you.
Nope, it's been a long night, a lot of information. I get it. So now we made it to the matrix that you had referenced. And so it looks a little wonky from when it converted to PDF apparently. So it has options A through F on the side, the limits, the cost estimates associated with them, and then the different improvements. There's probably some other elements that we could have added, I could have added on there, but this kind of gives a general quick glance of, hey, this option gives me this, but it doesn't give me this sort of thing. And so options B, E, and F check off most of the boxes of new infrastructure. But you can clearly see that those do not achieve the undergrounding component that is, would be desired. And that's really just, again, because of the costs associated with the undergrounding. So again, really, this is just a simple glance if you wanted to reference it as opposed to going through all the slides to fall back on. And really, so the remaining slides are, again, to touch on the same slides that Andrew had to highlight, hey, this is the extent of the overhead that would have to really be dealt with. And it's really not a simplified process that we would all hope it would be. And then lastly, this is an option that we feel is, or I felt in discussions with Denise is, what we would recommend. We feel it's got the largest return on investments in terms of what you can achieve in the area that you can achieve it in. And as we proceed with design, we would look for ways clearly to reduce the cost to fit within the budgets. And there might be some opportunity to use other enterprise funding if you wanted to make some other improvements. So, instead of using CDOT funding to add the valves and fire hydrants, you can maybe use enterprise funds for that. But that way you'd maximize the CDOT 4.8 million remaining and, use possibly any other city costs. So, and then, seek additional funding as, we feel that it would need during the design. And then work with CSU on how we can best fit the sidewalk around the poles or relocate poles accordingly.
So,
That's the end of the presentation. Now it's, open it up for
Natalie and
anything.
then John.
I'm sorry,
No,
Natalie.
Natalie and then John.
I think you mentioned this in a previous presentation, but why can we not underground just on the non-creek side, on the east side, and work on that, developing that sidewalk corridor?
That might be a Bill question. It has to be system wide. There's two components so that you have a transmission source. I guess you're taking the power from the plant to bring it into the city, this Colorado Springs. So those are the lines on the top, the high top of the poles. So that's one system. And then you have your distribution system, which then feeds the houses. Those are power lines on the lower down, and they're at the transformers. They feed the streetlights. So that's a separate system. So I don't believe you can do it, one side versus the other. I believe it'd be an all or nothing kind of setup.
Did you have anything else there, Natalie? Okay, thank you, John.
So Glenn, other than some of these components have some duplicate kind of things, it appears like if we wanted the entire project done, undergrounding, all these utilities and whatnot, we're something south of about $27 million in terms of just adding some of these options together without maybe doing the subtractions for like the duplicates in terms of the sidewalks and things like that.
Yeah, and I think it was maybe mentioned at the last meeting, about 23 million to do the entire corridor.
Right.
And I believe at that time, that was based on an earlier estimate that did not take into account that you would have to pay for the telecom and the full extent of the secondary services. But
Right.
That's probably without diving into each,
Okay.
I think that's
So-
probably accurate.
So if we only did the undergrounding and we took A plus D and added them together, notwithstanding the duplicates for, let's say, the sidewalk component and I guess the D, I think D also had some road asphalt resurfacing as well, right?
Yeah, there would be.
So notwithstanding those duplicates, that's something about 19 million, something like that, right?
If you're looking squarely
Okay,
at
thank you.
those overall costs.
Okay, thank you very much.
The council members? Okay. So I guess we're at the last of your slides there, Glenn. So council, I guess, what we're being asked is, do we have a sense of what we want to do? We've got 6 options in front of us, 2 of which are brand new tonight. I guess I think we're all having kind of a sense of disappointment given the cost. I think we all shared the idea that it would just be great to rebuild Ruxton and bury the utilities and have a beautiful brand, in essence, a brand new street. But I think the reality is here we've we've got 23 to $27 million of wishes and a little less than $5 million of spending money. And, you know, as I look at it, I think the recommendation to do F is financially feasible. You know, that's from the incline to Manitou Avenue. I think that would serve a lot of it would serve most of the residents. It would dress things up for the visitors. It doesn't get the overhead, you know, and that's to me is a disappointment, but we would be able to get some other things done. And maybe that's what we'd have to settle for. It's this kind of reminds me of an elephant, you know, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So maybe now we do option F and get done what we can and then go after the overhead utilities at a later time. Other comments? Yeah, John, please.
As well is I think we have so many increases that we've heard about that are necessary with regard to the water enterprise and the sanitary sewer enterprise. And then, of course, we've got the storm sewer thing all hooked into those water bills as well. And to me, I think the thing about doing F means I think that utilizes some funding that kind of protects those enterprises from costs and whatnot that eventually are going to have to be done in this area anyway. The only thing that I was just curious about, Glenn, was that on F, if we didn't completely re-asphalt all of Ruxton because we are basically putting in new fire hydrants, right? The sanitary sewer is being lined, but that doesn't really have a lot of asphalt penetration, right?
Right.
That probably actually is done when after we do the new sanitary sewer manholes, right?
Or they can be done together.
Okay,
Yeah.
right. Okay, so that's how that's put in there. And then the storm sewer inlets are on that right-hand side as you're going up the hill mostly, okay? And almost all those, we have very little storm sewer infrastructure. Most of those things just probably almost just go directly from the box directly into the creek,
yeah.
right?
Mhm.
Okay. So, but F did include completely asphalting all of Ruxton, did it not?
It does. Yes.
Yeah. What was that cost? Can you?
420,
Huh?
420,
Huh?
420. And I
Okay.
do want to mention, we can, just to think about, we can use PPRTA money for some of that also. So that doesn't have to be part of this project. We're going to have
Right.
to look at other.
So 420, so that pulls that cost down to about 540, right?
Yeah. And I would
And-
say that 420, I mean, that would be like a base cost before we have a contingency. So I mean, that could go up to $500,000 with contingency kind of just.
Okay,
built
okay,
in.
so that could shave $500,000 off of that one there.
Right.
And so that would bring that down to 5.2 approximately. And then we have 4.4 available, right?
You have
Or
4.8,
4.1,
4.8 available.
4.8.
Yeah.
So we have pretty close.
So you're in,
to-
yeah, you're in the ballpark that, yeah, you could probably look at. And one thing to really touch on these estimates, I mean, so bear with me for maybe a couple minutes. So when you look at these estimates on the top half there where it says demolition, erosion control and roadway, those unit costs and those quantities, those are pretty firm. I mean, the quantities are firm. We can measure those. The unit costs we evaluate, CDOT has a database from all their bidding statewide, and they pull all their costs for certain items associated with this. So like asphalt, they'll tell you what their bids are across the board. They'll look at what was the lowest bid, what the awarded bid was, and then they kind of generate a weighted unit price. So those are prices that we use, we evaluate, you know, if we feel maybe inflation should increase that a little bit or where it's located. But so those are pretty decent numbers that we can rely on. The other numbers under the miscellaneous, there's a lot of variableness there. Mobilization, it really is dependent on how the contractor wants to hide money, I guess. I've seen projects where mobilization could range from 50,000 to 200,000, just depending on where the contractor wants to have that money. And then there's mobilization. So that's for the contractor to bring in all their equipment, all their hauling costs. I mean, sometimes they'll build it into their unit costs for, like, say, storm sewer pipe. They'll build the hauling into it. Sometimes they'll leave it so that that unit cost is low, and then they'll have a higher mobilization, because the mobilization, they'll get paid 100% of that number, whether they get it or not. Yeah, so if they can do it, if they can bring out and are more efficient in bringing out their, you know, equipment or whatever, they can save money that way. So that's what that
I do
is.
want to mention with CDOT, you always have to go with the lowest bid. So there isn't
Right.
an option. Whoever comes in, you have to go with the lowest bid. There's no negotiations there. It's very clear of what we have to follow
Yeah.
for bidding processes with CDOT.
Yeah. So yeah, like I said, so there's some variableness there that you really have to really use judgment on and what you think it'll be. And then there is one thing on there that it's called a minor contract revisions item. That is a cost that CDOT requires you to include in your bid. So it's not a number that the contractor actually gives you. You tell the contractor, hey, I'm going to give you $100,000, a bucket of $100,000, for instance. And if there's a minor element of work, let's say they're working and the plans didn't pick up that there's a bunch of mailboxes that need to be relocated, and there's no pay item for that, they can do the work and get paid out of that $100,000. And so we can set that number. I know on the Manitou Avenue, the MAPS project, it was $500,000. And that just lets the contractor know, hey, we've got funding up to this amount, and if there's any work, and it's really to hopefully speed up the project so you're not stopping and delaying it for change orders that need to get approved and all that, or evaluated. It's just keeps the project flowing. And again, it's variable. We can set it as low or as high as we want. And so I on these, I set that number, I think, at 25%. So when we talk about the 5.8 down to the 5.3, it could get down to 5.2 just based on how we want to massage these numbers a little bit. And we really won't know until we get further in design and have that conversation with CDOT of what they would also allow and feel comfortable with too. So.
And Glenn, you know, earlier, well, back months ago when we were talking about this, I think the plan was that the work would be done in 5 months installments over 3 years. So I'm wondering here, I would assume just because of the massiveness of the job and our busy summer season that we'd have to break it into sort of like work seasons over several years. Is that still likely, or do you see it shaping up differently?
It can. I think we'd have to have that conversation. I know. So my experience has been, since I've been on the project, was we always had to work with the COG schedule. So the project had to be constructed in the wintertime. And so that really confined it. Okay, that kind of limits the phasing, you know, the limits of the project. So it could have been a 3-year project just to fit within that window. But I think you probably could go and build F, for instance. I think you could likely do that in one construction season, spring to winter time. I think so. If you didn't have to worry about any other factors, it definitely.
Does that save us money?
Yes.
I would imagine, because you don't have all that rollout or whatever
Well,
terminology you just called it.
Yeah. So
To keep like unloading all your materials and packing it up again and then coming back year after year.
I would, yes. So I think there's a trade-off. So intuitively you would think, yeah, get it all done, boom, the cost. But it depends on your restrictions of, hey, now we're potentially impacting a longer segment of your corridor and all the property owners. So that may increase the costs of your traffic control or the, the efforts that the contractor has to provide along the way. So you would, so.
Maybe that's not a good example, but
No, I mean, it's part of the conversation that we've had, and and that's why I say it's kind of driven the phasing because of we're trying to limit that impact of, okay, do we want to build it block to block so that people can still get in? And so if you do that, then you just have barricades and they have to use a side street. So there's a cost savings there. Or you say, no, you can't use the side streets. You got to keep the road open. So now you have flaggers every day, all day, and there's your traffic control costs go up. So it's really we can design it and we can dictate to the contractor how to build it, but there's
So
going to be some.
Are these estimates based on the assumption that there will be, the job will be handled over numerous years, and so we have all that extra?
No, so,
go?
no. And what I did is I put a percent on the traffic control. It's at 25% of the total construction cost, which is high. And that's really to kind of anticipate.
For your slush fund thing or whatever?
Yeah, yeah, I mean, yeah, in a way, but also to somewhat be realistic, and have an expectation that, for instance, if you did have restrictions on the closures, for instance, that, maybe you put in, and we had this conversation with Dole of, maybe the contractor provides shuttle service to the property owners or, golf cart service so they can park down lower Ruxton and be shuttled up. Part of that is, what do you do on trash delivery day, that the contractor's got to bring everybody's trash down to a collection point, so there's a lot of that, and we really don't know how to cost that, but it's something to consider. And so that's why we kind of just inflate the percentage a little bit to kind of anticipate that. So.
And
Yeah.
I don't think we can really say that yet until we do the design.
Right.
Once we get the design, then you start talking about, okay, how are you going to do it, right? But you've got to have that design, what it entails, and then look at the steps that need to be taken. Then you decide how it's constructed. But to give you an answer for that today, I don't think we can. We got to get the design done, and the design is going to take a good 6 to 9 months.
Well, the design itself, yeah, probably at least 9 months. But because CDOT's involved, they have a review process and they have what they call a clearance process. So they have to look at all the right of way, make sure you're within right of way. And if you're not within right of way, you need to get an easement, and they have to process that. They have to look at environmental impacts. They have to look at historical impacts, utility impacts. They have to. Well, you would hope.
You would hope, but for instance, just the Creek Walk took us over 8 months to get the
Right.
historic. So it really depends. We can't push CDOT.
Right.
We will do as quickly as we can. So that's why I said a minimum of 6 to 9. It could take 9 to 15 waiting for CDOT to work through it. So I can't
Right.
tell you that we'll start this today and we'll be ready in 15 months. I'll tell you, we'll start it today and we'll push this as much as we can to get this ready. And then once the design is done, then we have to talk about what are the steps for the construction and what that entails.
Yeah. And my understanding is, and I think it might be in the packet, was that letter, the recent extension of the design time.
Yeah, CDOT just gave us an extension for the design time because we were really hurried, and I was like, oh my gosh, we're not going to get this done. We did just get an extension for the design time. That's just for the design that we have to have done. So they've given us that. They also have to work in that extension to
Mhm.
make sure that we move forward. And if not, they have to give us another extension. But I'm going to tell you, CDOT, sometimes you can get things pretty quick, and the historic clearance took us forever for Creek Walk 4.
Julie, do you have another question?
I do. I don't know if this is related or not, but I have it in my memory that CDOT has to pay for half of the cost of our undergrounding. No?
CSU.
Oh.
And they don't have to. We have to put it in their SIP. So we have to put it in every year. They have to put it in their SIP and then it goes forward. So it's from
So when you put it
CSU.
in their SIP, is that the same as making an application?
We talk to them and we say, here's what we're needing to do. Here's the next project that we're going to do next year. This is the amount, or 2 years. And then they say, great, they go back, put it in their SIP so that they have it budgeted.
I see. Okay, because I'm just so disappointed that we can't. I know, I know we don't have 27 million. I just want to make sure that by avoiding the undergrounding, we're not asking for, a fire to destroy everything, but we are getting some new hydrants, I guess. So.
Well, and we're also, the biggest thing is the stormwater needs to be repaired. We have stormwater issues up there, and that wastewater line, the water line looks fine from the camera, but the wastewater line, we have to do something with that. So we're able to get some big projects done infrastructure wise with this amount of money and get this moving forward, and then move on to the next project with CDOT, whatever that may be. But first, we got to get this one done and get going.
I guess put it indelicately, if we have a sewer backup and it floods Ruxton and then flows into Ruxton Creek and then into Fountain Creek, we'd have some people from the EPA here pretty quick, and we'd be in a world of hurt. So it's a big problem that I think we need to be aware of.
Well, and also I know that if our sewers get too old and too deteriorated, they won't be able to do the liner anymore. So we don't want to push our luck.
I think
Too
that's a good
long.
point. So council, I'm kind of wondering here, we can certainly continue the discussion. What I thought I might do is just go around the table and see if we have options that we'd like to, that we're willing to support. So I'm willing to do either. It's just kind of, that might speed things up a little bit if we could get a sense of what options we favor. If there's no objections, I'll go ahead and poll council. Natalie, I'll start with you.
I'm comfortable with option F, recognizing that we've had to, settle for a little less than we may have
Right.
wanted.
Okay. John? Julie?
I'm fine with F, although, yeah, I'm fine with F. I just, that's fine.
Okay. Okay.
I was wondering if it would make sense to pull the asphalt off there so we can get it paid instead by our PPRTA or whomever it was, but that's just a minor issue. I guess F makes the most sense.
Okay. Thank you. Judith?
Yeah, ditto on the disappointment on the undergrounding, but I will support F, and I appreciate the way that you put this together for us. It was much easier this time for me to kind of conceptualize it. And I certainly trust that Denise will look for any and all funding sources to help with this project.
Great. Thank you. So Judith, you're in favor of F, is that correct? Okay. And Nancy?
Yeah, I'll be the odd one out. I still prefer A with sidewalk.
Okay. Thank you. And I would go with F. Again, yeah, I think with F, with option F. So we have 5 in favor of F, with Nancy looking to A. I think one of the things about F is that it's I think it's financially doable. We've got roughly 4.8, 4.9. That's F looks like it's about 5.9. I think our intent is to see what we can squeeze out of some of the other enterprise funds like water and wastewater and possibly PPRTA for some of the paving costs and so forth. So council, I think we're kind of coalescing on a theme here. We can discuss it more. If you have concerns, it's probably a good time. If not, I think this is direction to staff. Anybody further comments? Okay, Denise?
Yeah, by giving us this direction, we can now spend the money on the final design and not go back and doing more research. So that's really important. As you can see, we've already spent quite a bit of money. So this allows us to get the design, and it also allows me to start looking for funding options now that you've approved it, because they take a year to a year and a half just to start looking and submitting, especially for water projects. So this allows us to start moving forward with this. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And I guess relative to undergrounding, there may be some parts of town that'd be easier to underground than next to the creek where you have to bore underneath the creek. So hopefully we'll still get the undergrounding going and participate as a partner with CSU and get some of these lines underground and improve the safety of the community. But here, I think the direction here is to let's do something with Ruxton. Let's get it started. Let's get it done.
Thank you.
Any further comments, council? Julie?
I know there's some members of the public who are here on this issue and a lot of folks who are very concerned about this issue. I would appreciate it if the city could put some kind of, news out there to let folks know that it's going to take at least a year before we have any information. Because otherwise I don't want people to just be sitting on the edge of their seat and contacting us, twice a month wanting to know what the heck is going on.
I think that's a good point. And we've this is something of a milestone here where we've finally coalesced on I think when Julie, John, Judith and I, when we took office and Nancy, of course, was already seated, one of the first things we did was to listen to the Kimley Horn people talk about the design for Ruxton Avenue. And that was a little over 5 years ago. So we're finally getting to the point where we're going to turn dirt and pour concrete. So great. Council, if there's no objection, I think it's time for a break. Glenn, thank you very much. That was a good presentation, and especially for the matrix. Thank you. That was good. Let's take a break and let's come back at 20 after. I think we've got everybody back now. Let's go ahead and get started again. So the next item is it's proposal to adopt a 20-mile-per-hour speed limit in residential neighborhoods. And we've got our Deputy City Administrator, Roy Cheney, and Police Chief Bill Otto here. So Denise, did you want to do an intro or anything? Okay, they're familiar faces. So gentlemen, it's yours.
Good evening, City Council. Tonight, we're here to talk about the a proposal to adopt a 20-mile-per-hour speed limit for residential neighborhoods. That was the initial thought, but talking with the MAPS board, the idea is to adopt it throughout the city. So there's a little adjustment to that. I guess let me try this, make sure it's working for me. There we go. All right, so why 20 miles per hour? Basically, the big deal with this is a 10% risk of severe injury at 20 miles per hour, but it jumps up to 25% at 25 miles per hour. And once you hit 30 miles per hour, it's at 50% risk of severe injury and or death. So basically, slower speeds, being safer, calmer neighborhoods. The current speed limit for city code is residential's at 25, non-residential is at 35, and this is for unposted sections. Proposal is residential unposted 20 miles per hour, and then non-residential, we would just as well unposted at 20 miles per hour. Again, unless otherwise posted. So we always have an option to go slower or faster. Correct, yeah. Supporting evidence, Seattle and Portland did some studies, and so there's been fewer fatalities after that was imposed. NACTO, lower speed means safer streets. And that was the same presentation about complete streets that was brought to council, which soon we'll be bringing out the MAPS board to start looking at and maybe bringing that whole thing to council as well on what we want to adopt for the city. And then the Vision Zero is part of the strategy to reduce traffic deaths. And some of the ideas behind that is the traditional approach is that traffic deaths will happen. The new vision is traffic deaths are preventable. The old traditional approach was perfect human behavior. The new one is humans will fail. So we have to keep that in mind that they make mistakes. The old approach was prevent collisions. The new approach is prevent fatal or severe collisions, and that's where the speed comes in. And then individual responsibilities, the traditional approach, and now it's a systems approach. How do we solve it that way? And then that saving lives is too expensive as a traditional approach, and the new one is saving lives is not expensive. It's something we have to think about and do. The implementation plan, signage install at key locations, and that would be at the entrances to the city. So that's where we'd have a sign that states that all streets are 20 miles per hour unless otherwise posted. Outreach will led by the PIO and for community-based awareness. Make sure they understand the new rules, and then enforcement with the police department. We'll start with education and warnings so that people get used to the idea that we're at 20 miles per hour and not 25. Cost and resources, our signage are within budget. We only anticipate making 3-4 signs at the entrances. And we'll do signage like normal in any neighborhoods that want adjustment, which we do now. We do a traffic study and decide if they need to slow down their traffic. I've never had a request for increasing the speeds yet. So, and I don't anticipate that at all around here because of our narrow streets. Police department will phase in enforcement. So the idea is just try to educate and slowly get people used to the idea. And then ongoing staff reviews of effectiveness. We can annually look at the changes in speed and make those adjustments and decide if we have to change it. Pros, safer streets. It supports walkability, reduces noise and speeding. aligns with city goals of being more pedestrian aware and friendly and bikes. Cons, cost of signage and enforcement, drivers' resistance. Most people don't want to change their behavior at times, and then minor travel delays. There was a question about travel delays, and to give you an idea, if you assume a 1.5 mile drive, at 20 miles per hour, it'll take you 4.5 minutes, and at 25 miles per hour, take you 3.6 minutes. So basically, it's less than a minute of additional travel time. I don't think anyone will be in trouble for that. So, so what we're asking is to approve an ordinance to establish a 20 mile per hour default speed citywide, to amend the code to remove the 35 mile per hour non-residential default. The only non-residential area I could figure maybe is Serpentine, but then that's posted already anyway. And then it is supported by the Mobility and Parking Board, 100% voted for it. And then, and also supported by the police department, and Bill's here tonight if you have any questions on the police enforcement or what he thinks about the speed. And that's all I have tonight. And this would come back to future councils for the first and second reading, I believe, to get changed in the code. So,
Okay. Thank you, Roy.
welcome.
Chief, would you like to share some information with us?
Roy's pretty much done all the work on this. He's put a lot of effort into it. I don't see any issues with it at all. It looks great to me. We did a little bit of research on traffic accidents last year, 2024, and up to this point where we are in 2025, we had 80 traffic accidents in Manitou Springs jurisdiction last year, and only 2 of those were related to speed being the primary factor for the crash. This year, we've had 40 up to this point in the first couple weeks of April, and none are speed related. Various reasons, intoxication, inattentiveness, driving. There's all types of things. I think everybody knows that it's pretty tough to get moving in the summertime going down Manitou Avenue. We've already got the signs posted everywhere down on El Paso, up in Crystal Park, and I can't see anything that would not want us to do this. This looks like a good deal for everybody.
Okay, thank you. Let's go ahead and open it up to council for questions and comments. Nancy and then Judith.
Yeah, you said the only non-residential default you were thinking about was Serpentine. What about Manitou Avenue below the MAC to the arch?
Okay, so this would not affect Manitou Avenue. First, Manitou Avenue is already posted, so there's a sign. We would go through a process of reducing that speed limit with CDOT because they control that road. But there's anything that's already posted. We don't plan on changing anything that's posted. This would just, what really this covers is the neighborhoods right now. So I'll look at Pilot Knob. 25 miles per hour in Pilot Knob seems very difficult. But wouldn't surprise me someone tries to go faster, and they can legally. So we're just trying to slow those neighborhoods down and say, look, we in Manitou respect and want to protect the pedestrian and the bicyclist because that's who we are as a community, and we don't want you driving 25 miles in places that you shouldn't. And so that's not that they could do it there, but at the same time, I've seen people drive pretty fast in places I can't believe they do it there. So, so that's really covering the neighborhoods, and then streets that are already signed. Crystal Hills Boulevard, for example, that's already 20 anyway. So is Crystal Park Road. It's 20, but it is signed. You have Eastern El Paso Boulevard is 25. That will stay at this point. Doesn't mean it can't be requested for a traffic study, but that's not for us to decide right now unless we do a traffic study. So that has to go in for a request. And then Manitou Avenue from Chase Bank East is also 30. Right? So none of those will change at this point, but if it's not posted, they would be 20 miles per hour.
Okay. I just didn't understand that if it was already signed, it would and at this point in time remain what's signed?
If there's a want to
Except for the
change
neighborhoods, yeah.
areas, then that would be through the traffic study. They would request it. We would review the speed limit. With Manitou Avenue, it's more difficult because we have to go through CDOT. Not saying it couldn't be done, but they have a hard time with it already with going to 20 into downtown. But and then El Paso, if that section, there's like I guess it goes from Highway 24 to the border of Manitou, where it goes to the Colorado Springs. I think it's 25 along the whole path. So that could be an area that's maybe a concern. Someone wants to go down to 20, for example. So, yeah.
Judith?
I'm a big fan of East El Paso going to 20. That's a residential neighborhood with a park, a baseball diamond, and a soccer field. I mean, why that's 25 is beyond me. But that said, I just want a point of clarification on page 4 of the accompanying memorandum.
Mhm.
You have that the Parking and Mobility Board recommended we make all roads 20 miles per hour in the city unless otherwise, of course, unless otherwise posted, and remove the non-residential districts not posted. I'm in favor of that. I mean, I support that. And how is that different than what you're proposing? Because it seems to me that what the MAP board is recommending is pretty much 20 miles per hour citywide unless otherwise. So is there a difference there?
No, there's no difference. They're
Okay.
they're promoting what I suggested, except for non-residential areas. That if it's that you post it, whatever's posted is posted. And I did tell them in the meeting that if it's already posted, no plans at this point to change everything to 20 miles per hour. It's really protecting the neighborhoods at this point, and we will still handle those areas as they come up. And I haven't had any, like, for example, on Eastern El Paso, there hasn't been any requests that that speed is too fast. But someone could put one in, and I'd be happy to look at the speeds there and see if it's warranted. Talk with the City of Colorado Springs traffic engineer and see if it's something that needs to change.
Well, there used to be speed humps there, and people were happy with those, and they went away. Well, when the posted speed limit is 25, people are going to go 30-ish.
Sure, yes.
That's just human nature. So,
Yes, ma'am.
and that's an area of tremendous concern for me. So thank you for your clarification. That
You
was my only
bet.
question. Thank you.
Yeah. You bet. Thank you.
Natalie, please.
I'm also a fan of this and I appreciate MAP's work in getting this to us as well. I think that's been great. I just have a request that if there's a particular road, neighborhood, street where folks are getting speeding tickets over and over and over again, that we then look at things like a speed hump or a speed bump, or that we help them go the right speed limit in the area that we want them to go 20. Because I feel like we're setting people up for failure if we don't design the road to support the behavior we want to. So just kind of tracking that additional piece, I think would be helpful for me. So it doesn't look like we're just setting up speed traps just to give out tickets and make money as a city, right? Because that's not the purpose of this. And so I
Correct.
don't want to lose that in the
Yes,
system.
and it's a good point. The speed tables are working well on Crystal Park Road. They're working well. And so it has slowed the traffic down there. I'm actually getting less complaints of speeding down Crystal Park Road right now than ever before. I used to get them constantly. So they're really helping out. It's something I wouldn't mind expanding at some point. If we have the funding to add a few more. One thought was Becker's, because of some of the speed there in the summertime, and you could see some of that, so that possibly there. And then, other areas, there's always another area. And I think some people have asked if they can get speed bumps and speed humps as well. But we have limited ones, and we can move these, we can pull them out. But at this point, I think we'll keep it there for a little while longer and let it sink in, slow down, a new habit. So.
John, Julie, John?
Yeah, I know and thank you, Roy, for all that traffic calming on Crystal Park Road. And people kind of asked me, what were the ramifications of us changing that speed limit? And basically, it's a little more than 60 seconds that you're saving. okay, to basically go from Savelli's all the way up to the Gristle Park Gate. And to basically kill somebody or maim somebody for 60 seconds, I think is really foolish on the part of our community that we implement that kind of a policy as opposed to having this. I have to admit that I'm an advocate of just basically saying that speed limits ought to be pretty uniform in town and no more than 20 miles an hour. Okay. I think the speeding that's going on in Manitou Avenue is really crazy. Okay. You go over here at Old Man's Trail and there's no way, okay, that people are obeying the speed limit. The 20-mile-an-hour sign is way before the Chase Bank, okay, and people are still rolling like crazy, okay, in that area. And there are crosswalks there, there's pedestrians and whatnot. I think this is a good start. I don't know that it's going to make any particular kind of difference. It appears like, last week, I made a phone call to Mountain Metro, okay, complaining about a bus speeding on Ruxton, and they pulled the tape and it was 40% over the speed limit. And I knew it when I saw that bus go around that corner on Ruxton, that was way too fast, okay? All right. And so what's going to happen when I used to be on council back in the 80s and the 90s, it took us to kill somebody down in front of the Barker House before we got serious about this. And time is not on our side with the speed limits and the kind of speeding that's going on in this town. We're going to kill somebody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Julie?
I think it's great.
Okay, thank you. I guess, question, what's the corresponding default speed limit in residential areas in Colorado Springs? Do you know?
It's all follows a model traffic code, so it's the same thing.
Same, so maybe-
25, yeah, it's
Okay.
it's statewide and
It's kind of nice to have things uniform between communities. Okay. Yeah, I was kind of shocked to see that non-residential at 35 miles an hour. That's outrageous in Manitou on our little streets and so forth. Okay. I guess my read is that the sentiment of council is favorable here. I don't know that we need to comment anymore. Certainly if council have any more discussion, that's fine. If not, it would appear to me that the direction of council is to turn this into an ordinance and bring it in front of us.
okay, we will do that. Thank you very much.
Okay. Denise, did you want to make any comments on it? You're good? Okay.
Nope,
All
we'll
right.
figure out when we bring it to council.
Okay. All right. Well, that was, okay. You guys get the prize for the shortest presentation of the evening. Even the prize is you had to wait to be number 3. So, okay. Okay. Thanks. Okay, council, that brings us to council correspondence. Anybody have anything to report? I guess, oops, sorry. Nancy, please.
Yeah, went to the DCI conference last week and I thought it's my first time going to that and I found it very beneficial and I would highly recommend that next year Denise goes to it. Couple things, I learned a lot about brownfields and found out that Manitou probably has a lot more brownfields than I could have possibly imagined. And there's a lot of resources that are still available. We got federal and state presentations on it. And they anticipate that the funding in that particular area will not go away under the new administration. So that was good news. And I think for me, one of the big things I learned is that a lot of the cities are now going to things that Manitou has typically excelled in, specifically small stores, rather than bringing in a Costco, they would split the lot up and make a yoga studio, a ice cream store, a boutique hotel, and so on, instead of making a huge development. Manitou has pretty much always done that. And additionally, all the cities are really going to arts and creatives now in terms to promote their economic development. So I think it'll become something of a challenge for us to differentiate ourselves from what all these other cities are doing. So, but bottom line, I thought it was a very good conference and very worthwhile. So thanks.
Okay, thank you. Interesting. Anything else? I guess one thing, So last week was the city, its chipper program was taking place in Crystal, along Crystal Park Road and up in Crystal Hills. And I got an email with photos from one of the residents. It's up in the Keithley Log Cabin District, and they collected quite a pile of brush and branches and so forth. So they seem to be pretty happy, and they got rid of a lot of material. So that was the first zone that we've done the chipping program this year, and it looked like it was pretty successful, at least in that one neighborhood. Nancy?
Can I just ask a question about that? Was it publicized to the public before the night before? Okay, because I had missed that. I hadn't seen it until like the day before it was supposed to be in Crystal Hills. So apparently I was the only one who didn't see it. So, all right, thanks.
Okay. Yeah, John?
Yeah, I guess I'd like to remind people that the next zone, and Denise can tell me if I'm wrong, is April 22nd, which is Fountain Place and El Monte neighborhood, correct? I'm looking on the city webpage right now.
That is, I'm familiar with that. I know
Right.
that is the
Yeah,
next
so
one.
I
yeah.
just thought that for anybody who's listening in, that's the next one that's teed up is that neighborhood.
Yeah, and actually we could use a couple of what I would call fire ambassadors, people in those neighborhoods who might go around and let their neighbors know that it's going to happen. So if any of you can think of friends, associates, constituents in those areas, please let them know. Great.
And then the next zone after that is May 13th, which is the Ruxton Capitol Hill neighborhood.
Right.
It's the chipper week, that one. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's have the city administrator's report.
Well, I sent you the email today, but the most exciting news is the water tank filled today. So our new water tank was filled today. It looks like we had to test the water, et cetera. Everything's come back great. So hopefully we'll start utilizing it in the next couple of days. So that's huge. And then we'll get ready to start working on the second water tank. But that's a big, big thing.
Judith?
You
yeah.
bet.
The ribbon cutting on the 17th,
Yep.
is there going to be like we have shuttle service
Yes,
up there
yeah.
from City Hall?
I don't know if it's going to be from City Hall, so they're working that now. And as soon as we get it, we'll let you know. But there will be shuttle service up to it may be right there where there's some parking.
Mhm.
They're working those details at this point.
Thank you.
You bet.
Can I make a suggestion?
Go ahead.
Yeah,
Jim.
I was wondering whether we just sent a postcard or something to the Mesa, Minnehaha, those neighborhoods put up with all that construction traffic.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we ought to make a special invite to those folks to come to the ribbon cutting.
Okay.
Okay.
That's a great idea.
Good idea. Okay. Do you have anything else, Denise?
Yeah, the couple of quick things, the stormwater drain that's there by the library, that's supposed to be repaired this week or the first of next week. So that will then be completely done. And then remember, we're going to be patching all of Manitou Avenue under the PPRTA. So that will be coming to you soon. And then that area right there at Cannon and Manitou, the repair of the sidewalk, that's supposed to be repaired. I think this week is what you said. Yeah. So that will be repaired this week and we'll have all those cones picked up. So I just wanted to let you know that. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, okay. We will be adjourning from the work session. I don't actually need a motion for that from a work session, but I would, well, let's go ahead and do that. So we'll adjourn the work session. And then we're going to have to go into an executive session. So I'll ask the audience to, thank you.